Hello and welcome to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast with your host, Kevin Thiele, and my guest this week, Gareth Morris, who is the Senior Vice President International from OWN. Gareth, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm well, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no, not at all. It's an absolute pleasure. I love that background. That looks very cool.
Yes, indeed. We've just been through a rebrand this week. So now OWN, no longer OWN Backup.
Right. Okay. So the company's now OWN. So I got that right in the intro, did I?
Did, yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic. Let's get this stuff right. It's important. Gareth, thanks for joining the call today. Let's just kick off the podcast with a little bit of background. What is it you get paid to do today?
So I own the revenue number for OWN. So that's everything outside of North America, so EMEA and APAC. So that's sales and the retention of our existing customer base. It's about 2,000 customers. And then obviously the more important bit is the growth and the expansion of ACV to build out our ARR on the international side.
Well, that's quite a chunk. What does a typical day look like? Is there a typical day for you, or is it not possible to describe it?
So normally the start of the week is, kickoff meetings with the extended leadership team in international, most of whom are in London or Paris. The objectives for the week across functions, any events we're driving for, pipe gen goals, alignment meetings, and then, one-to-ones with my direct reports earlier in the week. And then forecasting meetings typically happen on a Wednesday and Thursday. And then, customer meetings, if and when applicable. I have to say, I would like to spend more time with our customers. As we've got bigger, that's got trickier. But I think it's one of the things I could do more of is spending time with our actual customers rather than on internal stuff. But yeah, that's typically how we spend our time.
Why do you enjoy the customer stuff so much still?
Well, fundamentally, we exist to serve their needs and solve their problems. And without them, we wouldn't exist. So, in the early days when I joined, we were a couple of people in London, and I was involved in every deal. I was essentially first line leading, and then you get involved in every deal. And only by talking to customers do we actually learn about what it is they want us to do now better and do more in the future. I was in the office yesterday, and we had one of our biggest European customers visiting, and I just happened to be walking down the corridor, and one of the customer success managers introduced me to him, and I hadn't met him before, despite them being a huge customer now for sort of 3.5, 4 years. And I just said, thanks for your business. What could we do better? And he had a one-word answer for me, and then we just riffed on that topic for a few minutes, and it was insightful. I took away some stuff from that I didn't know, and it was maybe a 5-minute interaction in a corridor. So, fundamentally, we exist to solve customers' problems, and we've got to constantly be reinventing how we do that and which problems we solve, because in a competitive market, there are plenty of other companies that might do it better, faster, cheaper than we do. So, how do we evolve and grow if we're not constantly in our customers' offices talking to them about their problems?
Could you give me an example of the sort of problem that OWN solves?
Yeah, so sure. So we started life as a backup and recovery tool for Salesforce customers, hence OWN Backup. Over the years, we've evolved into more of a platform that solves data security, resilience, governance, and security challenges. So, am I in control of the data that that's in Salesforce? Am I controlling the people that have access to that data? What is my security posture as it relates to my Salesforce deployments? So we now have backup products, recovery products, archive products, sandbox seeding products, data security posture analysis products, and we serve customers now both in the Salesforce ecosystem, but also the Microsoft and the ServiceNow ecosystems, solving not dissimilar business problems. Fundamentally, SaaS applications, you pay for the application from the vendor provides the infrastructure and the availability, but the data that you store and manage and move within that SaaS platform is the customer's responsibility. So this sort of shared responsibility model. And this is a shift in understanding in the last 4 or 5 years that perhaps previously wasn't there. I worked at Salesforce for nearly 5 years, and I had no idea that Salesforce didn't have a solution that was, sufficiently scalable to solve for that set of challenges. So fundamentally, we exist to ensure no company ever loses data in the cloud across all of their SaaS applications.
Oh, wow. That's quite a mission, actually. That is quite a mission. I love that. That's something I imagine you could not have thought you would be doing when you were 16. So I'm kind of interested to know how you arrived here. What would you take yourself back to your 16-year-old self, Gareth? What were you planning to do at that age? Do you remember?
So frankly, I had no grand plans. I had a fairly relatively, middle class upbringing in the Thames Valley. My dad was a BA airline pilot, so we did travel a lot in the 80s. We traveled to India, Africa, and I saw lots of poverty and deprivation, and it shocked me as a 14, 15-year-old in the mid 80s. People didn't see that stuff, right? People didn't travel like that on holiday then, and I sort of knew that I needed to make the most of the advantages I had in life just from having been born in the UK in the late 70s and being brought up in a middle class family. I knew I had to do something and make something of myself, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. I always had a job. I did a paper round when I was, I think, 14, 7 days a week. I got up, rain or shine, to go and deliver papers because I wanted my own money. I wanted, I think I was earning about 25 quid a week. My parents thought I was crazy, but I saw it as a means to be responsible for my own economic outcomes. And so
how long did you do the paper round for?
I think it was like 2 or 3 years. I mean, up until my GCSEs, sort of, I needed more study time and more sleep. I was getting up at five in the morning, 7 days a week, and needed
getting chased by people's dogs out of the garden.
Yeah, actually, you know what? That was a big part of it. Like, terrifying. There was this dog that menaced me, and it was this, quite fluffy looking dog, but the thing was ferocious. And it would just chase me around this crescent. And every morning, is the dog going to be there? Is it not going to be there? And frankly, I'm still scared of big dogs to this day. So
I'm not surprised. There you go. Look. So how did you end up then from this background coming into a sales role? How did that happen?
So the story is one you'll have heard before, I'm sure. So I took a year out before going to university because I did better in my A levels than I was anticipated. So I traveled a bit, but a good friend of mine decided not to go to university, and he got a job in a mobile phone shop, and I got a job with him. He got me a job working with him. So during my year out, I worked in a mobile phone shop, and this was the late 90s or mid 90s actually, when nobody had mobile phones and it was an up and coming thing. So I loved selling phones and working on commission. So we got paid more commission for sort of selling itemized billing or selling text messaging. And these were these old banana phones and Motorola's back then.
Yeah, remember them well.
And I just loved the fact I could earn my success at work had an impact on my ability to earn money. And I was good at it. I could persuade people. I was quite good at persuasion. So I did that for sort of 6 months, traveled, went to university, left university and applied to a company called Pareto Law, which now is quite well known, but in those days it was a very small little company based up in Cheshire. Went to an assessment day, and they assess you. If you get through the assessment day, they place you in sort of entry-level sales roles, so biz dev type roles. So I went through that assessment day, got selected, and ended up getting placed in a IT recruitment company in, I think this was late 99, early 2000. And the company was pretty small, based in my hometown, run by a great ex-sales director guy, a sort of a grizzled veteran of the industry. And he took me under his wing, taught me about selling and specifically recruitment. And I was headhunting, I guess, sales guys, that were selling for Juniper and Nortel and EMC, back in the days when, a lot of infrastructure sales. And I remember meeting a successful sales guy called Jeremy. I can't remember what his surname was, but he was probably 26, 27 at the time. I was 22. And he told me what he was earning. And I was like, wow, you can earn that sort of money. I need to get into sales. And so
the lights came on.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, well, I had this predilection for persuasion and selling from my childhood and just selling phones. But then I looked for an opportunity to get into sales, joined a SaaS startup in 21, I think it was. And, at the time, SaaS didn't exist. It was called ASP. I was the first sales guy. It was a family-owned business. The three brothers that founded it, I'd been to school with, the youngest of which was my best friend, the guy that I worked in the mobile phone shop with. And it went from there. We built a small business. We got to 25% market share and learned on the tools, built the sales team, having never done it before, made all the mistakes in the book. And then I guess it went from there, joined Oracle, and, here I am. So that's how I got started.
That's a great story. A great story, well told, actually. I'd like to pick into a little bit of that because I do find it fascinating. I was chatting to a previous guest on this podcast a little while ago, and we agreed on most things. But at one point, he said, "This is the toughest time for SaaS sales there's ever been." And I looked at him and I thought, frankly, got it. You probably haven't been around long enough to know that actually the toughest time for SaaS sales was, as you said, Gareth, before people knew what it was, right? When Mark Benioff set up Salesforce, the whole concept of putting data in the cloud was madness, wasn't it? No one was going to buy into that. So you were at that point, weren't you? You were at that sort of inflection point.
Yeah. So, the company I worked for, and it was called Uniservity, was founded like a year after Salesforce. So, back in the, early 2000s, I remember seeing an interview with Mark when he was being interviewed, and it was the days with the no software sort of logo.
That's right.
We were copying him. Like, that was our revenue model. It was a recurring revenue model, pay as you grow. Like I say, SaaS didn't exist, and that didn't even become a term till 5 or 6 years later in the mid 2000s. So, it was tricky because people just weren't used to buying technology in that way. But we could see the benefits financially speaking.
Well, how do you? I mean, let's just look at that for a minute. How do you sell something that doesn't yet exist in people's minds?
Well, I guess we took the approach. It sounds cliched, but what problem are we solving, and how important is the problem? What's the value of solving the problem? And how do you pay for other utilities that you consume? It's you typically pay on demand. You pay for what you use. Buying software on a capital basis and depreciating the asset over some years. Like, do you want to make this big capital outlay for something that's going to be obsolete in a number of years? And so it was the classic SaaS sales pitch. You pay as you grow. You don't own the asset. It's OpEx spend. We update the software every 3 months, so you've always got the latest and greatest, no upgrades. I mean, everyone now knows the pitch, but that's really what we were doing back then, is just figuring out, well, why is it people would buy this way? What are the benefits to the consumer of technology? And it resonated, as of course it resonated for Salesforce once they got to critical mass and accelerated. And even when I joined Salesforce in 2012, there was probably 150 people in the UK. It was not, they'd gone public, right? But this was not an enterprise software company by any stretch. It was mostly mid-market. And so being part of that, I guess, scale up from Salesforce from 150 people in the UK to sort of 2,000 and really going into the enterprise was, again, a great learning experience and a great journey.
You bet. Absolutely. Huge journey. Let's continue that journey a little bit then, try and move through the years, ratchet the gears up a little bit. How long were you a bag-carrying salesperson before you stepped into a leadership role?
So, I guess a year or so in the early days at Uniservity, then built the team and ended up running international sales and marketing for them. I mean, it sounds more glamorous than it was. It was only 15 people or so. But then when I joined Oracle, I actually went back to an individual contributor because I realized I had a lot of opportunity to make mistakes, but really I'd never seen it done well in a professional enterprise class selling outfit. So I, went back on the tools, as it were, and had a good few years at Oracle really learning how proper enterprise selling is done at scale.
Fantastic. So, and then your first leadership role then, when was that?
So at Salesforce, individual contributor throughout my time at Oracle, joined Salesforce as an individual contributor on the enterprise side in strategic accounts. And then I think I did that for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and then went up to a first line manager running the retail business. So that was 2014, 2015, I think.
How did you find that shift from rep to manager?
Well, frankly, it was tricky because it was an underperforming part of the business. Salesforce, was a B2B CRM platform. Retail and the B2C industries didn't really buy CRM. They have loyalty programs. So it was an underperforming business. I took it over when our leader left the business. And I went from being one of the guys to the leader. And so it was sort of a turnaround, A, and B, it was, how do I get all these people that I was the peer of to now follow me? And so I did find it hard, to be fair. And I tried to build a sort of turnaround strategy with them. Like, I enfranchised them into the problem solving of, like, this is where we are, guys. What are we going to do about it? I haven't got the answer, but in this room, probably collectively we have. So what are the things we need to do, and what's the strategy we need to build together, and then how do we execute it, and what are each of our parts to play in the execution of the strategy. So again, management 101 stuff, but there's no question I did find it difficult.
And let's dive into leadership a little bit then. You've been leading sales teams, quite big sales teams now for a couple of years, haven't you? With direct and indirect reports, so second line managers. What is leadership for you, Gareth?
So leadership, I think, is creating a compelling vision that people can see a path to chasing, like that's meaningful for them in their professional and personal lives. It's creating the vision. This is where we're trying to get to, folks. This is ultimately what we want to do, whether it's, you know, a certain size of business, their own personal income or economic outcomes. So setting a vision that's compelling. And then the management piece is, how do you then create the infrastructure and the process and the repeatability to get to that vision over time?
And what about getting people to buy in emotionally? Because we know as salespeople, don't we, that everybody buys everything emotionally first and then justifies it rationally afterwards. How do you get people to buy into that vision?
So I think it's the obvious thing. It's like, what's in it for them? You know, you've got to find a way to appeal to the individuals. And when you're second or third line leader, you know, you've got to do that in chunks. You've got to get your direct reports on board. Then you've got to find a way to cascade it down so that everyone is compelled to follow the vision. And it's basically, you know, what is in it for the individual, like know the individual, what their motivators are, what drives them, and then create the conversation where they can see those outcomes for themselves. And being in a high growth environment like Own, like we've gone from sort of, you know, 100 to nearly 1,000 employees in 5 years, like being in that sort of environment and hiring people that want to be part of that environment, it creates opportunities for that growth. You know, most people that join a high growth SaaS company are sort of fairly hard charging, dynamic, want to succeed, they're comfortable with ambiguity. So it's not hugely difficult if you hire well to get people charging in the direction that you want them to charge in. So I think it's just about, you know, knowing your people, knowing what motivates them at every level in the organization, and then trying to give them what they want and what they desire out of that journey.
So would you say it's more of a head-based leadership or a heart-based leadership from your point of view?
Well, that's a good leading question, because, you know, one of my sort of mantras is leading with your heart and your head. So I think a few things on this topic. Now, number one, as an individual contributor in a sales role, no matter the industry, or, you know, sales is as much about the heart as it is the head. And that is something I heard someone say about 10 years ago. I can't think who it was to attribute it to them, but it's not something I came up with. And I heard it and it really resonated with me. You can be a really miserable accountant and hate your job, but you can still run decent accounts and report the financials pretty well. You just can't be successful as a salesperson. It's about people, it's about connection, it's about relationships, it's about, you know, problem solving, and it's about, you know, fundamentally reaching out across multiple dimensions. So I think, you know, sales is as much about the heart as it is the head, and leadership equally well is as much about the heart as it is the head, right? You've got to appeal, you know, you've got to build a plan with processes and structure and rigor, but fundamentally you've got to appeal to people's sort of hearts and as well as their minds. And so, you know, when we've had challenging times in this company economically through COVID, and now with the very difficult situations in Europe with the wars going on in the Middle East now, you know, we've just got to show maybe a bit more heart than head, like, and a bit more humanity, a bit more vulnerability. You know, it's okay to show that, you know, you're finding it hard. So I think it's a bit of both, and it depends. And as many things in life, it's all about the context. It's all about the context. You've got to be sensitive to the context in which people are experiencing their reality, and then you've got to adjust your leadership strategy accordingly to show that you're listening. I think most failures in leadership are they're just not plugged into the reality that's being experienced on the front line. Like, you just got to stay connected. I do skip levels, because I want to stay connected with the reality that's being experienced.
So what's a skip level call?
So with somebody that one of my direct reports, and then I also do another layer down. So with individual contributors, it's important to me to know how they're feeling about things.
So if you're doing that, you presumably have to have quite a good degree of trust with the manager of that person. Is that an
Yeah,
issue?
obviously, I ask permission before I do it.
Yeah.
I don't do it on the back channel. But yeah, I mean, with this, this is I think most successful leadership teams, it's a trust-based environment.
Yeah.
You're not doing a great job with your leaders if the trust isn't there, right? So you've got to build the trust to be able to execute on things like skip levels and skip levels, because if you don't, people are just protective, But I think that the transparency that comes with building an organization where skip levels happen and they're expected to happen is generally a good thing, because you can flush out challenging management practices, bad leadership, poor morale. You can just get ahead of those things.
I'm fascinated by the concept of this vulnerability that you talk about, which is, I think, I agree with it. I'm not going to disagree, but it's just such a huge change from when I started leading sales teams, which was about 30 years ago. It was just in the early 90s. It was just not a thing. Right? We had to be just tough, resolute individuals who took no shit from anybody, really. We didn't take any shit from customers. Well, we might be prepared to take a bit of shit from customers if they had big sort of budgets, but from salespeople, the idea that you were allowed as a leader to show any vulnerability, or that you, frankly, particularly cared that much about the emotional welfare of your staff, it wasn't really a thing. I think it's a great development, actually. But I wonder if that makes your job sometimes more difficult as an extra dimension to deal with now as well. You're almost like having some degree of pastoral care for the people that work for you, are you?
I mean, and I think that's the way it should be. Sometimes companies in their early stage, to build a sense of fraternity or belonging, talk about themselves as a family, and of course it's not that. It's like a professional sports team. So the analogy I would use, it's like a professional sports team, and you do have an element of care, emotional care for the people that come to work for you or as part of that organization. People spend a lot of their lives at work, so of course it's incumbent on us as leaders to create the environment where they feel sort of safe and free to be themselves. Like, bring your whole self to work. I'm someone that, a large degree of my sense of self-worth, self-esteem, is how well I'm doing at work, right? If I'm doing well, I feel good about myself. And I'm happy to tell people that. I tell that to my team, and I tell that to the whole org. So, I don't mind people knowing that, it's not okay for me not to be doing well. I feel validated, and my self-actualization comes from how well I do professionally. Yes, as a husband and a father and as a friend as well. So that's the first piece. And equally, I think having this sort of posture of sort of malcontent, you counter the vulnerability, humanity side with this constant posture of malcontent and drive for better results. I've always been dissatisfied with where I am and always want to push for something more. So if you can do that effectively, like get people to push for more for themselves and their families or the company, whilst recognizing them as people and human and inherently emotional beings, by demonstrating those behaviors yourself, I think you can build more trust. And again, it's part of getting people to see you as a human, and people follow people, they don't follow companies. I think they follow strategy and they follow vision, but fundamentally, people are following a person or people. They follow their leader, they follow the human, they don't follow the company, I think.
I think it's true in selling as well, isn't it? You have to sell yourself. Prospects buy the salesperson first, don't they?
I think so. Well, yeah, they do. When there's product parity, it's the personal connection that will win, probably. I think the buying environments change. It's a bit of a cliche, but they've done 76% of their research before they even reach out to any company to talk to a salesperson. So for sure, I think during and post COVID, we've got more to selling on Zoom. Like we're less facing the place, less on our customer sites. And I was talking to one of my AVPs and RVPs last night about Q4. We're in our Q4. We're talking about a particularly big deal, and I said to them, let's just go on site. Let's get on the plane and go to Germany and go and see these people. You can bet your bottom dollar our competitors aren't in their offices, right? So let's just go and see them and make these connections and just show the human side. That's just a big way. I think it's more of a differentiator now. Frankly, people just want to sell over Zoom. They don't want to travel. They don't don't want to go and see customers on site anymore. And I think it's a thing we should be all doing for sure.
I agree with you. I've noticed that the lasting relationships that I've had with friends and customers have all been with ones where we've spent time together, physical time together. I think you can build a relationship remotely to a degree, but at the end of the day, if you want a real solid foundation for something that's going to last, then face-to-face is the way to go. Get together with a team. Do you do that with your own sales teams? Presumably you do socialize outside of work. There were company get-togethers and stuff.
Yeah, we do. I mean, we invested in a large prime central London location, to be our EMEA HQs. We've got 30,000 square feet right in the middle of the city. And so, we do that. Our workplace team do a great job of putting on events, social events, as well as obviously the sort of drinks and stuff. We do, mindfulness, mindful eating, yoga, the things to try and get people to commune in the office. It's no secret, like many companies in our industry, the return to office has been a challenge. We're trying to get the balance right between getting the outcomes we all know are true, like getting people, we're better together, better bonds, better teams, with the reality that people are now more distributed than they were and don't necessarily want to commute in 5 days a week. So it's all about getting the balance right so we can drive the right outcomes from results and building the connective tissue. And I think it's also important for people earlier in their career, if they want to develop and grow, you've really got to be, you've got to be working with people and building those, I guess, that connective tissue, between different departments and being seen and showing up, in the physical workplace for sure.
How often are you in the office in London, Gareth?
So 2 days, sometimes 3. It's 2+ hours each way for me, and I make that lifestyle decision. I live near the South Coast, but happy to commute in because it's important, and the leader needs to be visible. I don't think you can lead over Zoom very effectively for very long.
Do you have an open office, or are you sitting in your own private office? How does that work?
So it's a good question. So I have got a private office, but I only use it for one-on-ones and Zoom calls with the US. I'm most of the time out on the floor with everyone else. I just don't love being sort of hiding away in my office. I'd much rather be out. So, my office is mostly empty, but I do use it for those sort of one-on-ones.
And you're a busy man. I mean, you've got a lot going on in terms of reports, lots of moving parts in the business. I imagine you do still, as you say, perhaps a fair bit of business travel again, do you?
So I'd like to do more, to be honest. I mean, I haven't been down to Australia. I don't get across to Europe as much as I'd like. I'm in Paris next week. So, I'd like to do more. And if any of my teams listen to this, I'm happy to do any customer meetings. I mean, I'll tell a brief story. We did a horrible job on a pursuit where we gave a C-level executive in a company a pricing offer and then backtracked away from it. And he got very upset. And I decided to get on a plane and fly to Switzerland just to go and see this guy and just apologize. And, because we behaved poorly. It was terribly executed, and I wanted to make amends for it. So tough meeting, but we ended up winning the business. He appreciated me going to face the music. And he also offered to be a reference for any other CIO who was considering our technology in Europe. So, even the bad meetings, the tough meetings are worth getting on a plane and going to see. So I'll I should tell the folks all the time, I'll do really tough meetings, and I'll do the glad handing as well. I like talking to customers, so would like to do it more fundamentally.
Well, good. And I think all of the salespeople, all of your managers, all of the leaders will be listening to this podcast. I'm convinced of it.
Maybe.
I hope so. We've got Medic Media behind this now. I guess you're a Medic fan, are you? You use Medic?
So I've never formally deployed it, but yeah, I mean, I learned about it some years ago, and I do think it's a pretty good, sat nav system for where you are in a deal. I'm not sure whether you call it a sales process, but it's certainly a orientation tool. Like, where am I? What do I need to do next? There's many people in the industry that don't know Medic.
Well, yeah. So the great news is Medic's been repopularized by the famous Andy White now in the UK, and Medic Media are behind it. So it's going out on all Medic Media's channels. By the time this hits the press, everyone's going to know about it. Trust me. We've got time for a couple more questions. I'm fascinated by what you do to unwind at the end of a day, because you're such a busy guy, and obviously you get an enormous amount of fulfillment from your work, which I think is great. Because why would you do it? Why would you put the hours in, regardless of the paycheck, if you didn't? What is it you do to unwind at the end of a busy day?
My one hobby, because I think, teenage kids, I think really time for one hobby, is Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There's
I've never heard of this. Is a new one on me, man. I never
even
heard of it. I've heard of jiu-jitsu.
I could talk for hours about it, but you're
Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Okay, let's
off.
Right.
So it's a grappling martial art that started in Japan, but came to Brazil about 100 years ago, and a family called the Gracie family basically picked it up and adapted it to suit actually smaller, less physically strong combatants, and it's grown over the last 100 years to be very dominant in UFC or MMA. The first UFC in the late 90s, the guy that just dominated that was a Gracie family member called Hoist Gracie, and he just came out of nowhere and dominated the field. And it's a very effective grappling based martial arts. So think about like judo and wrestling sort of combined. So you're on the floor, and it's very physically intense, because you're basically trying to choke each other unconscious and or break limbs, and of course you tap out to stop your training partner do that.
You're not selling it to me at the moment.
But it's great, it teaches.
I love it, but I have done jiu-jitsu myself many years ago, a different school, I think. Are you any good at it? Have you risen to a level of?
I'm 46 this year, so my body doesn't let me be as good as I'd like to be, but I'm progressing, I'm improving every week. It's about the progression rather than the destination. I mean, I did enter a tournament. Should I just mention? Yeah, I may as well mention this because you asked me. I entered a tournament in the summer, and I won the gold medal. So I'm
fantastic.
Southern England champion at my age, weight, and belt. But if I don't compete again, which I don't plan to, I can say I'm undefeated. So I'm only undefeated. I'm never going to enter again because A, it hurt, and B, I was really nervous. So
you're currently the undefeated Southern area Brazilian jiu-jitsu champion. Well,
my slightly portly weight, my elderly age, and my relatively novice level belt. Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. That is a great story. Well, listen, one last question. What's the one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of your sales career?
What we talked about earlier, that to be successful, you've got to show up, and it's as much about the heart as it is the head. It's about your passion, your drive, your ability to connect with other people, help other people solve their problems as an individual contributor. And then as a leader, it's the same stuff, like be in the service of others, and think of yourself even as a senior leader, like you're in the service of the team. Like I work for them, they don't work for me. And I think it's seeing it as fundamentally solving people's problems and being in the service of others. And therefore it's okay to show up with your humanity, with your vulnerability, and let people see your true self. I think that's probably what it is. In my early days, I thought it was, as you described it, like it's about being tough and about being inscrutable and invulnerable, and almost like a machine, relentless. And it isn't those things. Actually, it's about the other things we've been talking about, the human stuff.
Well, Gareth, you've really shown the human face on this interview today. You've been prepared to be a bit vulnerable. You've admitted some secrets about Brazilian jiu-jitsu that we didn't expect. I have to tell you, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to the listener. Please do give us a review if you like what you hear, because it helps enormously with the ratings.